and welcome to Community Designs. I'm your host, Sophie Kneebone. Today we're in Heidelberg Heights in the City of Banyule. We're checking out the Livable Housing project. So this project was all about building houses that cater for people with differing needs and making them adaptable for people who are older or might be living with a disability. So I'm going to be talking to a few people involved in the development of the project as well as some members of the community. Let's check it out. So we're actually standing inside one of the buildings from this project, and I'm here with Michael Hutchison, who is the Senior Property Officer for Banyule Council, and Steve Jennings, who is the General Manager for Town Living by Metricon. So hi guys, thanks so much for joining us today.
Hi Sophie.
Hello Sophie.
So Michael, tell us a little bit about how this project came about.
Sure. When Council purchased the site of the state government, it was a former school site. Council looked to lead development outcomes in the community, and it listened to the community about what the community wanted. And that included environmental sustainable design outcomes. It included some open space, as well as including Council's new Livable Housing initiative.
Yeah, great. So what were some of the key objectives for the project?
So some of the key objectives, 20% housing needed to be livable. So that included your openings, your doorways, accessible housings that people can grow into and live into. But as well as that, as I mentioned, there was also the environmental sustainable design outcomes, the retention of high value trees on the site as well, incorporating those into the design, and some open space as well.
So this is probably a question for both of you. How did accessibility actually get worked into the contract of sale?
Yeah, look, so what we did, these development guidelines we took to the marketplace, we sold them with the land. And what we said to the purchaser was that if you're buying the land, you're buying the development guidelines. And we're going to put that into the contract of sale and lock it up into a Section 173 agreement. So a Section 173 agreement, in fact, is a contract between Council and the land purchaser.
Yeah, great. And Steve, for Metricon, what were some of the challenges involved in this project for you?
Great question, Sophie. And I think the real challenge for us was just being able to take on board all of the objectives up front, knowing that and setting that framework up for us on how we go about our design, and then making sure that each of those particular objectives were catered for in the relative parts of the houses as well. So for us, the topography of the project gave us a few constraints in terms of heights, and then being able to integrate the levels required under the livable housing side of it did pose a bit of a challenge for us because there is a bit of slope across the site. But again, working with Council and Council's officers, work with our engineering team and make sure that we did achieve those objectives.
The key here, Sophie, was that Steve knew from the beginning what they were buying into. The constraints of the site, what Council wanted as a development outcome. So there was no surprises along the way.
Yeah.
And importantly for us as designers, knowing what those key outcomes are up front gives us the ability to integrate it. So it's not a standout option or it's not a standout issue, it's much more about integration through the rest of the development.
So Steve, what were Metricon's prior experiences with accessibility in these kinds of designs?
Yeah, so Metricon as a contract builder, we do work with companies like Lendlease who have retirement villages. So we have a lot of design expertise in making sure that we can cater for that particular type of market, and retirement villages is a classic, and there is some synergies between the two. And we've done a number of those projects in the past, and we have an internal team as well that looks after detailed design. And that's been transferred into this project, and particularly this house is one example, and there's a couple of other house types as well that they've taken into account.
And what's the market response been like?
Yeah, Sophie, from our perspective as a developer, in this particular instance here, we've got 117 townhouses that cater for a wide-ranging group of purchasers. Part of the sales process was to give people the opportunity to be aware that there is a livable housing component, but also it offers some flexibility around living downstairs. So from a market acceptance point of view, it was actually received really quite well, and we've certainly had no pushback from a sales perspective at all. The project sold remarkably well as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And what about you, Michael? What kind of feedback have you received about the project?
Look, the feedback's all been positive, and it's great to hear from the developer as well, the purchaser, from us of the site, that the, I guess, guidelines we put around the site didn't inhibit or have a negative impact upon their sales.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fantastic. And for both of you, what would you say to other people who might be considering a project like this? Like, what would you say to encourage people to take these considerations on board?
I would say working together, communicating well. We were up front at the beginning, as I said. We listened to the community and our policy about internal stakeholders about what we want to see in our development guidelines, and making sure that the development marketplace was aware of that when you took the site to the marketplace so that they can incorporate that into their design outcomes.
Yeah.
And I think from a developer's perspective and a builder's perspective, it's knowing those constraints. I wouldn't call it a constraint up front, but it's not actually a constraint. There is the opportunity to actually work with the community and still have a commercial outcome that is, you know, beneficial to us and to council as well. So from our perspective, there certainly wasn't a huge roadblock in terms of being able to achieve the outcome at a huge cost impulse, but and there was certainly no downside to the market as well. So we both see it as a bit of a collaborative approach to get to where we are, and I think at the end of the day it's been beneficial for both parties.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. It sounds like you've really taken these things that could be seen as constraints, but really you've presented them as exciting challenges.
That's
and
it.
worked really hard to
Good
overcome
opportunities.
It has been.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I'm here with Nolan and Duke, who are both members of the Banyule community. Thanks for joining us, guys. Nolan, I'll start with you. Can you tell us a little bit about your involvement with the community?
Yes, I retired in 2013 and thought I needed to do something in the community, and Banyule Council at that stage were starting a group of residents to advise council on the council becoming an age-friendly council. So I joined in 2014, I think.
Yeah, fantastic. And how do people's living requirements change as they get older?
Well, I've found that I don't bend quite so quickly or as easily as I used to, and I'm just speaking from personal experience. There are things that take much more time, and as well as that, fingers and joints don't work as well, and I think it's easier to stumble, easier to trip over minor things that you wouldn't notice when you're younger. There's some of the things.
Yeah.
Bending, creaking knees, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's some of the feedback that you've had from members of the community that you've spoken to about this project? Has anyone had any thoughts on it?
Well, people have been very supportive and interested, yes. Yeah, I think it's going on well. It's slow, but it's going well.
Yeah, absolutely. And Duke, could you tell us a little bit about some of the challenges that people with disabilities face in general kind of day-to-day living that we might not necessarily realise?
I have a really good perspective of what it's like. I've been a resident in Banyule for about 30 years as an able person, and living in a 3-storey house. And in 2009 I had a motorcycle accident and was bound to a wheelchair. So I was able to have a really good comparison between the community where I live, being in a wheelchair, accessibility as far as shops go, as far as just being able to get around and have independence. And so it's been a really good experience for me in life. It could have been a lot worse, but luckily surrounded by friends and relatives that push me on to be able to have a really good form of independence and be able to get around, which is really important. And look after myself.
Yeah, absolutely. And what are some of the key considerations that developers of houses or builders need to bear in mind when they're designing a place to live?
It's got to do with having door widths and just height levels of even the most simplest of things, of door handles, light switches, being able to turn power points on and off, being able to sit at a table, being able to have a shower, have a basin where I can actually brush my teeth, toileting facilities, having toilets the right height, having rails where I can actually lift myself without having to have a carer with me. And I built a house in Banyule after selling my other house that was very much designed for me in a wheelchair. So it's been really good.
Yeah, oh, that's fantastic. And for both of you, I mean, looking around these houses, what do you think?
I think there's a lot of excellent points.
Yeah.
You know, I just from my perspective, I like the idea that there's plenty of space, and if things change for me, I can visualise that there's enough space to alter things in my life so that I can still maintain my position here if I were living here in your house. Yeah.
Well, it's really interesting, isn't it? I mean, my grandmother is 90, and we've noticed the same thing. It's the tiniest little things that we would never have even considered. You know, at my parents' house, there's a tiny little front step, and it's really hard for her to get in and out. You know, it takes a team of us to.
But even with some, sorry, I didn't mean to overtalk you. Totally, but even with stilettos, you know, see people tripping on things like that. With young people. I don't wear stilettos anymore. And I think too, things like the PowerPoints being right down close to the ground is a difficult thing. I've had to raise some of mine, and the builders were said, "Why they look so bad up there?" And I said, "Well, it's only a trend, you know. I can at least reach it there, and I suppose if I was in a wheelchair, it would be easier at that height as well."
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that adaptability was a key part of this project, because so many different people have different needs, and so being able to make those changes was a really key part. Is that something that you would agree with?
Yes, definitely. And look, I see this place as having potential.
Yeah, great.
And if it's got potential, that means you can modify it in some way. It may not be just right at the moment, but if it's with some modifications, it can be made right. You can put little steps and ramps that will overcome that issue of the doorway. Little problems like the pantry behind me. I can't get into the pantry, so although my wife would complain about it, I think that's quite good, because then I won't have to do the cooking. Right? So
you can have a quiet word to the developers.
She'd say that it's a real disadvantage not being able to get the ingredients for cooking.
But how powerful that it's actually in the building design that some of these things have changed.
Exactly.
I mean, that's not happened before in my knowledge.
There was no potential in the past. It was very fixed, and I'd have to use the word exclusive. Exclusive for people that had no impairments or disabilities. Now there is a filtering happening where small things are changing, and it gives it what I call potential to be able to adapt to and be inclusive as far as a person with an impairment or disability is concerned.
Exactly, because that's the key thing about having diverse voices on councils and you know, listening to members of the community, because if you don't live these things day to day, they're not necessarily at the forefront of your mind when they need to be when you're designing homes for people in the community that have different needs.
Yes.
So what would you say to you know, people who might be embarking on projects like this or have the ability to influence these kinds of projects? What would you encourage them to do?
Talk to people with knowledge, and I think sometimes the costs are things that scare people off, but it's much cheaper to design something in the beginning rather than alter it. Much cheaper.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's such an interesting point. What about for you, Chick?
I think the community should start to realise that there's a change happening where there are our age, elderly people are becoming a greater proportion of the community. So new housing that's going to accommodate them should be moving towards that. And I just believe that you need to, if you're requiring something, is to have a voice in it. Because sometimes it's just a simple thing, as you say, of having a PowerPoint higher so you don't have to bend down. If you've got a bending problem, it can be done. Or changing light switches, changing accessibility of various things, like being able to get to having the right sort of handle on a handle for the tap.
Yeah.
Because if you've got arthritis, if you've got the wrong sort of tap, you can't turn it off and on. Little things that in the planning stage and in the architectural stage, before it gets built, is so much cheaper. And if we can not do gigantic things, because as you say, there are variances, a wide variance of people with various impairments and disabilities. But if we can start looking at, hey, if we do something slightly different and bring about a gradual change, I think it will be a nice evolution.
Yeah. So it sounds like getting input right from the planning stages is really, really key, and making sure that
it might be good if the government got in on the building planning.
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your time today. It's been so interesting talking to you, and this is such an important project, and I really hope that more things like this can be done. So we're here with Joel Elborn, who is the Manager of Urban Planning and Building for Banyule Council. Welcome, Joel. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
So Joel, tell us a little bit about how this project started and what your involvement is.
Sure. So in around 2013, we identified a need to respond to an ageing population, particularly in Banyule, and saw a real opportunity to work within an existing planning policy framework to actually start delivering some more accessible outcomes. And what we're aiming for is something between what we would say is visitable and the other end of the spectrum being accessible, and going for something that we call livable housing, which is a collection of about 7 features that we're looking for new planning unit applications to respond to.
And so what are the main goals of the project?
Sure. So we're really looking to deliver housing diversity and provide more opportunities for our residents to age in place. So as their needs change through life, housing that they can stay in.
Great. And can you talk a little bit about the planning stages for a house such as the one that we're standing in? What kind of communications happened? Who was involved in the planning of the adaptability of the homes?
Sure. A key challenge in this is really upskilling our planners, and they're under a lot of pressure to balance a number of objectives around trees, neighbourhood character, building heights, and things that the community see in outcomes. This is something that's quieter and more under the radar, but it's really important that they lend their attention to it in assessing planning applications. Convincing the developers that incorporating these features actually adds value to their product is also something that's important in the process, and ultimately making sure that we consider this in our planning outcomes.
And what about goals for future projects? Has there been any discussions around using this project as an example to influence future developments?
Yeah, well, as council was the landowner for this site before the sale, we were able to lock in this requirement not only in our planning policy expectations, but as a clause in the contract of sale. So a real opportunity for council to embark on a showcase and lead by example. But ongoing, our expectation is that 1 in 3 of new dwellings as part of multi-unit developments, or 20% of larger apartment developments, incorporate our 7 features.
Oh, great. And what other key features involved?
So it's things like having a bedroom at the ground level, stepless entry, wider doors and corridors, and more transitional space in bathrooms, around toilets, with an ability to provide a rail in future. So insisting on that structural reinforcement as part of the initial build to make it easier if that adaptation is required later in life.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I think that key feature of adaptability is so important. I'm interested to know, how did you arrive at those key 7 features? What were the discussions around that like?
Yeah, well, Livable Housing Australia have done a lot of work and actually have a number of standards, and what we've done aligns with not the gold standard, but is a more moderate approach. And a real important aspect of our success, we feel, is that we're not pushing this so hard that we break it, and such that we're fighting to have the features incorporated. So we take a really moderate and flexible approach, and appreciate that you can't expect 100% compliance with this.
Yeah, of course. And so with all of those kind of challenges and discussions in mind, what would you say to encourage others who are maybe embarking on a project similar to this one?
Sure, and there's a lot more work we can do around encouraging and also insisting. But some research that we've done reveals that it's about 22 times cheaper to incorporate 4 of the features at the design and build stage than a later retrofit, and unlocking the value and having the market actually appreciate that there is a benefit to doing this.
That's been a recurring theme with some of the conversations that I've had today, is that idea of including these features, you know, from the ground up, so to speak, right from the planning stages. I think that's so important because you do have to kind of put it into business terms, I suppose. Would you agree with that?
It's a marketing exercise.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, it's really interesting, and I can't wait to have a look around the house. Thank you so much for your time, Joel. That was the Livable Housing Project in the City of Banyule. I've learned so much today from all the people that I've talked to. I hope you've enjoyed it. Thanks for watching Community Designs. I'm your host, Sophie Kneebone. We'll see you next time.